Gun bans are to the left what abortion bans are to the right. Policies people emotionally support despite lacking any statistical credibility to their effectiveness that it will somehow save the children. Now, before you finger blast off all your angry comments at me, hear me out. It is perfectly understandable why people have such intense emotional feelings on this topic. You see things about mass shootings or school shootings on the news, then you hear some soundbite statistics attached to these tragic stories, and you would have to be absolutely heartless to not have a passionate emotional response to it. And before we go further, I'm not advocating the NRA side of this argument. Arming teachers is a ridiculous idea. Stand your ground laws make everybody less safe. If you make owning guns your entire personality, you are fucking weird, it's cringe, and nobody likes you. The people with the weird murder fantasies about like overthrowing the government and taking our country back are ridiculous, and they would never be able to pull that off. And not even because the government has drones and nukes and shit. Like, you can get around that, but the lack of cardio and organizational skills on the people who fantasize about that. You may be a proud member of MEAL Team 6, but the Rascal Scooter Mobile Infantry Brigade couldn't overthrow a Walmart, let alone the government. And more guns statistically do not make us more safe. But then again, neither do gun bans. And you know, as much as I love the saying, you go far enough left, you get your guns back, I am not advocating for an armed seizure of the means of production. I have high hopes that we can fix our problems democratically. And honestly, I'm not even really advocating for or against gun control. I'm really advocating against advocating for gun control. And I'll make that make sense in a second, but I got a whole podcast episode about it on the Let Them Eat Toast podcast where we get much more in the weeds about it. I really recommend you checking that out if you have any feelings on this topic. I've also done videos in the past on here where I get more into the statistics than I will in this video that you can go look up too. The loudest advocates out there for gun control tend to base their perspectives around mass shootings and school shootings. And these are absolutely horrific, horrible, heartbreaking events, but they are statistically nearly unquantifiable. They are super rare events. They get tons of media coverage, so you think that they happen all the time, but you are statistically more likely to be legally executed by the government than you are to die in a mass shooting. And I'm not suggesting that we ignore these problems because they absolutely do need to be addressed, but advocating for solutions that are ineffectual at best is worse than ignoring them. Guns are absolutely a huge killer in the United States, but gun deaths is almost an irrelevant statistic. If we put a pie chart up of gun deaths and then you want to look at mass shootings, it doesn't even register on the pie chart. It's that small. The biggest chunk of it on that pie chart is suicides. 43% is homicides, which is still huge, but we'll break that down in a minute. And about 1% is accidental. But now a lot of times you'll hear a statistic like guns are the biggest killer of children. And while that is true, it's often used in a way that leads you to believe that school shootings are then the biggest killer of children, because where else do kids get shot? The reality is it's almost never at school. So if we ban assault rifles to save the children because we think it'll stop school shootings, which it won't, but let's say it did, let's say we were able to magically ban assault rifles and never had another school shooting again. Gun deaths would still be the leading cause of death in children and would change the statistics by absolutely nothing. No readable percentage. In fact, if we were able to magically ban assault rifles across the board, it would change gun death statistics by basically nothing. All rifles, including your granddad's hunting rifle and your kid's .22, account for a mere 3% of total gun deaths. Assault rifles fall under that category. They are only some fraction of that 3%. The FBI does not break the statistics down beyond just rifle. In fact, basically all gun deaths are caused by handguns, but that's something that nobody ever really seems to talk about or care about because people are more emotionally comfortable with the idea of handguns. And this is why the gun death statistic is so bad. Because when people hear that 50,000 people a year die from gun violence, you just assume everybody's getting murdered. Probably a lot of it's mass shootings because you hear about that on the news, and when those happen, you hear a lot about AR-style rifles, and now we assume if we ban ARs, we can save 50,000 people, and it's just ridiculous. And then if we focus our efforts on that, we aren't actually focusing our efforts on the people who are being harmed by this. Again, 54% is suicide. Now, I don't think anybody would disagree that the way we address suicide should be drastically different than the way we address homicides. And under the umbrella of homicide, the solutions to reduce street crime, like say a murder during a robbery, is gonna be a drastically different solution than domestic violence, a drunk husband murdering his wife. And I'm pretty sure if you asked people if coming up with a solution to prevent something like the Vegas shooting would be more similar to preventing something like Timothy McVeigh's Oklahoma City bombing, or preventing your drunk uncle from tripping and shooting himself during hunting, most people would say McVeigh. But when we use gun deaths as a statistic, we're lumping in Vegas with your tripping drunk uncle, we're lumping in a robbery gone wrong with a husband shooting his cheating wife, and you're lumping in suicide with a guy shooting a home invader. And that that is genuinely insulting to all of those victims. We aren't going to fix any of those problems by looking at them under that umbrella, and there is next to no statistical evidence to suggest that most of the proposed legislation or current legislation has any effect on any of these things. Now, there is some. Waiting periods certainly do reduce suicides and domestic violence. Safe storage laws certainly do reduce child deaths, but those are targeted policies that make sense and are backed up by statistical evidence. Things like most people think are common sense, like expanded background checks, tend to have very little correlation to reducing crime. Assault weapons bans have absolutely no correlation. And while there's absolutely roadblocks put in place in large part by the gun lobby to studying gun violence, and we certainly could and should have more in-depth studies of these things, we should still never be basing policies on the way it makes us feel. And when I say I'm not advocating against gun control, I'm advocating against advocating for gun control, this is what I mean. Getting things that are divisive topics like gun control, abortion laws, healthcare, it requires a lot of political capital. And whether you agree with it or understand it or not, there's a lot of people who really enjoy firearms and firearm-related hobbies, and that's a big part of who they are, and a big part of the way they vote. So when you come and you say you want to take somebody's AR away, which is something that means something to them personally, and you spend all of that political capital trying to pass a ban that statistically, even if you did get it passed, won't accomplish anything, the people whose stuff you're trying to take away are going to go to the voting booth and vote against the people who are trying to accomplish all of the other shit that's important to you. You know, shit like universal health care and free college tuition and better safety nets. All the kind of shit that statistically actually does reduce the violent crime that you're trying to bring down by banning black scary guns. So I actually don't give a shit about the gun control. I give a shit about burning up our political capital on useless gun control that we could be using to get things that actually make a difference in people's lives. And also, all gun control is racist, but that's a topic I ain't got time for right now. All right, thanks for hearing me out. Now you can finger blast me your hate comments.